Hey everybody, it's Chris. I'm in the middle of a video series where I'm going through the various classes and looking at their damage potential. And for most of these videos, what I'm doing is a couple builds, then I do the DPR calculations, then I graph them, and I compare them to the other classes. I'm going to take a little bit of a break from that with this video today because I'm just about to start covering the Druid, and the topic today is going to be very relevant to looking at the Druid damage. And this isn't just going to apply to Druids, but I think it maybe applies to Druids more than any other class. And I do think this information is important to cover before we get into DPR builds. So we're going to talk about Conjure Woodland Beings today. We're also going to talk a little bit about Spirit Guardians and Yolande's Regal Presence, because they have the same kind of interactions that I'm going to be talking about with Conjure Woodland Beings. Now I'm going to talk about something today that is really powerful, really, really powerful, and I now have experience as a DM dealing with it several times. And so I want to talk about power, and sometimes power is great. I am an optimizer. I want the powerful combinations. Sometimes, though, it can be too much because you get into situations where one combination or one spell or one feature kind of takes over, and it becomes the thing because it's just so much better than everything else. This could be the situation with spike growth in the old rules and the new rules. The whole cheese grater thing could, if you built around it, be so effective that it could just take over your game. And my issue is I don't want just one kind of strategy to take over D&D for the next several years. Because, you want to see different things, not the same thing over and over again. So this is actually going to be more of a cautionary video than a recommendation video. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean this won't be fun. Probably will be fun once or twice or three times, but I do think there will be a point where it gets monotonous. And just because it's monotonous doesn't mean it's not your best mechanical choice. And that's where the cautionary tale comes in. So let's get into it. So this is Conjure Woodland Beings, 1 hour concentration spell from the old Player's Handbook, the 2014 version. And what it did is it summoned a bunch of Fey creatures. And what they decided to do in the 2024 Player's Handbook is instead have summoning using the ones we saw in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that summoned one creature, so you wouldn't have just this whole load of summoned creatures on your map. And so what they did is they decided they would redesign all these conjure spells to do something else. So actually in the last printed public playtest, we got Conjure Woodland Beings, and this is the redesign. It says level 5 conjuration, and you might have noticed that the spell I just showed from the 2014 Player's Handbook was level 4. This is going to be relevant. But it was level 5 conjuration, 1 action to cast, range of self, 10-foot radius, and concentration up to 10 minutes. And it says, you summon nature spirits that flit around you for the duration until the spell ends. Each creature you choose that enters a space within 10 feet of you for the first time on a turn or starts its turn there must make a wisdom saving throw, taking 5d8 force damage on a failed save or half as much on a successful one. In addition, you can take the disengage action as a bonus action for the spell's duration. And then there's upcasting. When you cast a spell using a spell slot of 6 level or higher, the damage increases by 1d8 for each slot level above 5. And so this should look a lot like Spirit Guardians if it was upcast to 5th level. Same damage as Spirit Guardians at 5th level, same upcasting. It's damage in a radius plus some other effects. And so here's the old version of Spirit Guardians, and if you look, you're going to see very similar wording to what we just saw with Conjure Woodland Beings, except, of course, this one starts at 3rd level. This has been considered one of the best spells for clerics all along. Ever since the 2014 Player's Handbook, this is basically a must-have for clerics. Very, very solid spell. And the way it works is if a creature enters the area or starts its turn there, it takes the damage. And ideally, if you could get a creature to enter the area and then start its turn, it could take the damage twice in one round, which was nice. In fact, technically speaking, if you could get that creature out again, and then back in again, and then out again, then back in again, on different turns, it could take the damage over and over again. Not so easy to do, but we definitely had builds built around doing that just by force movement, right? So Spirit Guardian's great spell. Then the Player's Handbook came out, and it got changed. So this is the version of the Spirit Guardian spell we have now with the 2024 rules, and it says protective spirits flit around you in a 15-foot emanation for the duration. By the way, it's all the same stats at the top, action 10 minutes with concentration. Then it talks about when you cast a spell, you can designate creatures to be unaffected by it. That's technically an improvement. Before you had to see them. Now you can just designate them, whether you can see them or not. Any other creature speed is halved in the emanation, and whenever the emanation enters a creature's space, and whenever a creature enters the emanation or ends its turn there, the creature must make a wisdom saving throw. So instead of damage when they come in or start their turn there, we're now saying damage whenever they enter, whenever they end their turn there, or whenever the emanation enters their space. And so I ran a bunch of sessions in October, and what I found is that players naturally, seeing the big change to how Spirit Guardians works, and spells like Spirit Guardians, for the most part, built around that to see what they could do with it, and the answer to that was a lot, to the point where I'm actually concerned about the future of my games if left unchecked. So we saw what Conjure Woodland Beings looked like in the 2014 Player's Handbook. We saw what it looked like in the playtest. This is what we got in the 2024 Player's Handbook. They moved it back to level 4. Then they said you conjure nature spirits that flit around you in a 10-foot emanation for the duration. Whenever the emanation enters the space of a creature you can see, and whenever your creature you can see enters the emanation or ends its turn there, you can force that creature to make a wisdom saving throw. So the first thing we should see is the same language as Spirit Guardians. The creature takes 5d8 force damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. The creature makes the save only once per turn. In addition, you can take the disengage action as a bonus action for the spell's duration. The damage increases by 1d8 for each spell slot level above 5. Now, what you should notice is the damage didn't change, and the wording for using a higher level spell slot didn't change, which is weird when it's a 4th level spell. And I have to think there was a screw up. That's what I think. I think during the playtest, they, came up with a new Conjure Woodland Beings based roughly on Spirit Guardians. They made it a 5th level spell by mistake. And then once they realized their mistake, likely through the playtest feedback, I know I let them know that it didn't match the 2014 version, and I assume lots of my viewers did, is they went back and they changed it to 4th level, but they didn't bother to consider the rest. And the reason I think that might be the case is because they also missed fixing the using a higher level spell slot. You would think if they looked at this and said, let's make this a 4th level spell and think about it, the damage increases by 1d8 for each spell slot level above 5 would have been above 4, which they didn't do. This has already been errated. So if you look in D&D Beyond, this is not what you're going to see. But if I look in my printed version of the Player's Handbook I have, this is what's there. So they obviously made a mistake. They have already fixed the mistake in terms of using a higher level spell slot. I wonder if the 5d8 damage was also a mistake, if it should have been 4d8. So what we have is Conjure Woodland Beings does more damage than an equivalent level Spirit Guardians. Spirit Guardians, as I mentioned, already was always considered a great spell. So now we have a spell that does even more damage. Now, it is a smaller radius for the emanation, and maybe that's the difference for the d8. Maybe. But in what I'm going to show you, the radius doesn't really matter. It's kind of immaterial what the radius is because of the changes they made to when the damage takes place. There's one other spell that has similar wording, and that is Yolande's Regal Presence. Here it is. This is a Bard and Wizard spell, and it is 5th level, and it does 46 damage, which is less than Spirit Guardians does or Conjure Woodland Beings does, especially if cast at 5th level. Nevertheless, because the wording is the same, whenever the emanation enters the space of a creature you can see, it is going to have the exact same issue that Conjure Woodland Beings and Spirit Guardians now have. Okay, so as I said, I ran a number of one-shots in October for optimizers and who worked around the changes to these spells to see what they could do with them. I want to show you some of the things that they did. So what we see here is a D&D map, and this is the map they were playing on. It is roughly based on an actual official map, but when I run official adventures, I change them a lot, so don't think this is a spoiler. You're going to see some things here that absolutely were not in the published adventure. But anyway, what we have is, you can see Druid, and the Druid has a circle around them. That's Conjure Woodland Beings. Whether you use squares or circles does not matter. Doesn't matter at all. So I've made it a circle here on this map. And they had cast Conjure Woodland Beings at 4th level, and they had wild shaped into an owl. All right, so I'm going to show you first the owl statistics. The only really statistics that matter here is it has a fly speed of 60 feet, and it has flyby. The owl doesn't provoke opportunity attacks when it flies out of an enemy's reach. So the bonus action disengage from Conjure Woodland Beings isn't really needed if you're in owl form. You definitely don't need to be an owl. Anything that's fast is pretty good. So here's what one group did. So they had a wizard and a druid. So the druid had the Conjure Woodland Beings, was owl, and they'd cast Long Strider on themselves, so their fly speed was now 70. Then the wizard came up and cast haste on the druid, and haste doesn't last very long, but it didn't need to last very long. It doubles the druid speed, so that 70 becomes 140. It also gives an additional action that can be used to dash, meaning that druid had 140 movement, 280 if they dashed, and if they dashed twice, which they could do, 420 movement. So I'm going to zoom out. As you can see, we got a dungeon full of creatures. Here's what they did. And I should mention that this module said that doorways were all soundproof. So creatures in other rooms didn't hear what was going on. But they had opened this door. Druid went down the stairs, saw there were enemies to the right. We're not in combat yet. Druid still has lots of movement. Druid goes over here, and says hello to all the enemies with the Conjure Woodland Beings, and then flies back again. Now, just going to show you some damage numbers here. This is what you would expect from a 4th level Conjure Woodland Beings. Now, I'm assuming a 40% chance of successful saving throw. That's probably high. At least in the adventure I was running, most had less than 40%. But let's say 40% because that's the assumption I usually make. There's the damage calculations. Average damage each time a creature takes damage from Conjure Woodland Beings is 18. Meaning if they take it once, it's 18, then 36, 54, 72, 90, 108, 126. 126 is enough to kill anything in this adventure. And I adjusted stat blocks. Things were tougher than they were supposed to be. But let me just show you what happened in the game. So all these creatures have already taken, average of 18 points of damage. So we roll initiative. Now the druid had specialized in initiative, and so they got to go first. And what they did is they went in again, and they left again. And then they readied their action because there were a couple things that still had a couple hit points left because they got lucky with saving throws. And the action they readied was a move action. And they just went in again, and everything was dead. So battle's over, and nobody's done anything yet. So now the druid's in a room filled with dead creatures. Still have only used a few seconds of the haste spell, so might as well keep checking things out. So they head down this hallway here. They see a zombie in this hallway, so, they go down, kill the zombie with the Conjure Woodland Beings, keep going down, and what they find is a doorway that is closed. So they decide what they will do is they go into this hallway here. They unwild shape. They go back. They open the door, and it's filled with creatures. So we roll initiative. Druid wins. All right. So Druid goes down, says hello to everybody, goes over here, says hello to everybody over here. He excludes the guy right here because that's somebody he's supposed to save. And then he leaves, readies an action, comes back in, hits everybody again. And the thing is when you're hasted and long stridered, you are fast. He moves all the way up this hallway, and has enough to get a fair bit around the corner. All right, now it's their turn. Most of these cult fanatics are dead, and some of the Nothics are also dead. All right, so that's the situation the enemies are in. And our big bad guy right here is about 2/3 of the way down on their hit points as well. And it's now their turn. What are they supposed to do? There's nobody. There's nobody they can attack. There's nobody they can see. They have this big, long hallway, and there's just no one down there. So they start rushing. They start rushing up the hallway. And what does the owl do when it comes to their turn again? Well, guess what? They come back down. They zip over everything. They kill everything except for the big bad guy. And then they come back and around the corner. And now it's just the big bad. They're mostly dead. So what are they supposed to do? Well, I had them ready an attack. If they see the owl, they'll attack. So the owl comes back and comes around, and yes, gets attacked and takes some damage. But, I mean, at this point, the combat is over. The big fight is over. The other players didn't really need to do anything. There was a wizard who cast haste. And the thing is it just kept happening throughout the rest of the dungeon as well. Like, you open a door, and yes, there are creatures there. But before you roll initiative, this one takes damage, because that's the way the rule works now. As soon as it's in the area, it takes damage, even if you're not in combat yet. So it takes damage before we roll initiative. Then we roll initiative, and the druid can simply move to his position where it's not in the emanation anymore, move into a position where it is, and that one is, and then move back out, and then ready their action. They don't even need a haste anymore. Ready their action, and come do it all again. And now this one has taken 3 instances of damage. And it hasn't even gone yet. That's 54 damage on average. Then what can happen is, so you got the monk here. Monk's turn comes up. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to grapple the druid. And that takes one of their attacks. And then they can pull the druid into the room. Everybody takes damage. Monk makes some attacks on the Balguras. Then just pulls the owl back out again and moves away. Now the fighter can come in and grapple the druid and pull them in, and the fight is over. And this happened room after room, and nothing ended up having anything to do on their turns. There was no one to attack half the time, or when there was, the battle was mostly over already anyways. And, you would think of Conjure Woodland Beings or Spirit Guardians as area of effect damage, but they're actually incredibly effective single target damage as well. Honestly, you can deliver the damage, theoretically, as many times as there are turns in a round. So the druid's turn, they move. They move in, they move out, creature takes damage. They haven't taken an action yet. So they ready an action to move. And they move in and out, and the creature takes damage again. Now it's taken damage 2 times. Then you got, the monk or the fighter pulling them in again, pulling them back out again, and they're taking damage a 3rd time, a 4th time. And the thing is, the monk or the fighter have to give up an attack, but they will do more damage just by moving around that druid than they would ever do with a single attack. And it doesn't cost them that much movement because, the druid is an owl, so it's tiny size, so they can grapple it. They're not even slowed because there's 2 sizes different. But if we really want to optimize, we want to increase the number of turns in the combat. We can do that. Druid can use a wild shape to cast Find Familiar. The Wizard can cast Find Familiar. The Warlock can cast Find Familiar, and according to the rules, all the familiars get their own turns in combat. So that's additional turns in the order. And, maybe it's a case where the Druid will mount the familiar as part of their turn, because you can do that now. Not all familiars are tiny anymore. You can now make a deer, which is a medium-sized creature, a familiar, because you can choose any CR0 creature. And then the deer can move in and out, taking the Druid with it, delivering the damage again, and then the Druid gets off. Or there's Animate Dead. If you cast an Animate Dead, the zombies or skeletons all have their own initiative too. And if you upcast Animate Dead, you get additional creatures. You can actually get a lot of creatures on a map. And on their turn, you use your bonus action to command them. And on their turn, what you've commanded them to do is to grapple you and pull you in and pull you out. And so if you have one skeleton, that's one additional instance of damage. If you have 10 skeletons, that's 10 additional instances of damage in one turn. Or you can just double the damage, because maybe there's a cleric in the party who casts Spirit Guardians, and maybe the cleric is small sized, and maybe as a druid you wild shape into a pony, and then the cleric can just get on the pony, and now you have 2 emanations going, but it's not the same spell, so they stack. So then when you move in and out, and in and out, they're not just taking Conjure Woodland Beings damage, they're taking Spirit Guardians damage too. So you double the damage every time you move in and out. In my experience, I ran 5 one-shots. It was all the same one-shot for 10th level characters. Is the more they focused on what we call the Rugby strategy or the Pinball strategy, the better they did. The easier the adventure was, to the point where it was trivial. And that could be an issue, because do I want to play for years and years and years where they all use this strategy because it's the best strategy? No, I don't want to do that. Also, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense how these spells work now. So, theoretically, let's say we have this Barlgura. They have finished their turn in a Conjure Woodland Beings, and they take damage. So let's theoretically say a round goes by until it is their turn again, and neither they nor the druid has moved. So they've been in that Conjure Woodland Beings getting wrapped up and whipped up the entire time. They've taken the damage once. But if at some point before that round comes up, the druid leaves so that the Barlgura isn't in the area anymore and has that reprieve, and then moves back in, okay, well, they're in it. Well, then the Barlgura has had less time in Conjure Woodland Beings, yet has taken double the damage, or triple the damage, or quadruple the damage. That doesn't make sense to me. I'm having trouble envisioning, why are they taking double, triple, or quadruple the damage when they're in Conjure Woodland Beings less? Like, they should be taking less damage, right? But that's not the way it works. So why make this change that doesn't really make any sense and is also just ultra powerful? Well, my assumption is because that's how Spirit Guardians worked in Baldur's Gate 3, right? Baldur's Gate 3 was super popular. They're hoping to bring in players from Baldur's Gate 3 who maybe don't play Dungeons & Dragons to actually try the tabletop game, and kind of makes sense to, if you can copy something from the video game and put it in the tabletop game, it'll be familiar for the newer players. My guess is that's why they did it. The problem is, in Baldur's Gate 3, these strategies that I've represented, a lot of them you just can't do. You can't do the damage over and over and over and over again, because there's just not as many ways to move yourself in and out when it's not your turn. So what it did is it presented this opportunity for extreme abuse that didn't exist in the video game, and now we've got it in the official game. And the reason we have it in the official game is because, for some reason, they decided to make this change to the 2024 Player's Handbook, and despite 2 years of playtesting where they presented things to the player base, and we all had a chance to look at it, We all had a chance to try it out. We all had a chance to give them feedback and say, this works, this doesn't work. This one they skipped. This one they just threw it in there, this massive change. And I got to think they didn't realize how massive a change it was. Or they never would have done it without playtesting. But this massive change ended up in there. And with no ability of us to give them feedback. And so now we've got this problem. So what do we do with the problem? Well, I mean, the first thing you can do is, if you are a player and you're playing with other players and you all recognize that this strategy is available, well, it's your decision whether to use it or not, even though it's really powerful. You can choose not to do it. I have made a decision a while back that I wasn't going to abuse spike growth anymore because it got boring. It's very, very good, but it got boring. This will get boring too. It probably will be fun for you. I think the groups that I played with all said it was fun. And I think it would be fun for them maybe another time, maybe even another time after that. But there's no way a year from now, if they're doing this over and over and over again, this one tactic that doesn't even make a lot of sense, there's no way that's still going to be fun. So I have to do something about it. And my thoughts were, first off, maybe countermeasures will work. And what I mean by countermeasures is we've always had spells in D&D. This isn't new. We've always had spells in D&D that are potentially problematic. One of those spells in the 2014 rules is Force Cage. So you could have your big bad guy, and this is supposed to be the most challenging fight in the adventure. And if you ran adventures as they were written, like pre-published adventures, often they would have no defense against Force Cage. So, the players would save their Force Cage, cast it on the big bad guy, fight's over. Yep, okay, done. And like on round one, before the bad guy got to do anything. And that's not fun, right? It might be fun once, but it's not fun every time. You want to be challenged some of the times. So as a DM, what I would do is I would think about Force Cage. And I would go, encounter by encounter and go, do I want Force Cage to work in this one? Sure. We want, Force Cage to work some of the time. Do I want Force Cage to work in this one? Well, this is supposed to be the big fight. So I got to give, the big bad guy some kind of countermeasure. So maybe I'll give him a teleport, or maybe I'll give him the disintegrate spell or something so that, Force Cage doesn't just end the fight. Might steal an action from the big bad guy or a legendary resistance or something, but it's not going to just end the fight, and we can actually play it out. And so I'm thinking maybe I can do a similar kind of thing with this strategy. Maybe I can, adjust some monsters. So, they have some kind of defenses set up. I don't want to get too much in detail because my players will be watching this and I don't want to give too much away. But I've told them all that expect some countermeasures next month. And we'll see how that goes, right? If it's like Force Cage, then a few countermeasures will fix the problem. If it's not like Force Cage and the countermeasures don't work, well, then it's really going to have to come down to either an agreement amongst us all not to do it, but that kind of sucks, right? Because, the Druid lost summoning. Conjure Woodland Beings is part of the compensation for that. We want them to be able to use it. I guess it's just a matter of pulling in and out and in and out that we've got to agree not to do. Or we could just revert the wording, right? Spirit Guardians, we used it for 10 years, and it's a good spell, but it's not, broken. So maybe we use the old wording for Spirit Guardians and apply it to Conjure Woodland Beings and Yolande's Regal Presence as well. That could work too. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll have to kind of work it out over the next couple months here. But as it is right now, this is a problem. And like I said earlier in the video, I don't have a problem with things being powerful. I like things that are powerful. I just don't want things that are so powerful they take over my game. And, I really wish they had included this in the playtest. This was too big a change for them to surprise us with the 2024 Player's Handbook. I know they didn't want us to know everything, but this was not something to keep from us because we could have told them that this is going to be a real problem, and then they could have made adjustments before it came out in the Player's Handbook. But that's not what happened. This is what we have, and now we have to deal with it if we want our games to not devolve into this tactic over and over again. And I'm not saying that's the case with your group. Your group might be a sensible group that goes, we don't want this to be in our games. We don't want to play that way, so we're not going to do it. And that's, of course, the easiest fix is just the players agreeing not to do it. Yeah, I just thought I'd mention this because I'm about to do DPR calculations for the Druid, and Conjure Woodland Beings kind of has to be part of the mix. It's one of their main spells. So how often do I assume the damage, for their DPR? Well, I think I have to assume it once. I have to assume it once per round, and despite the fact that it could happen over and over and over again, because I gotta think that most groups are either going to agree not to do that, or the DM's going to house rule it, or the DM's going to have some kind of countermeasures to prevent it from happening. But there's going to be some reason why you're not going to just be able to do it over and over and over again. So I just don't think I'll be including that in my DPR calculations. And I figured I should do this video before I get into the Druid and have to explain all this in one video. So that's the issue I have found. Whether you want to call it the Rugby strategy or the Pinball strategy, I don't care. One way or the other, it's a strategy that, I'm not going to let take over my games. And I just figured I'd give this cautionary tale for you guys to make sure it doesn't take over your games as well. Okay? So, thanks everyone. I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody. Talk to you soon.